18 of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights guarantees the freedom of religion or belief and reinforces the elimination of all forms of intolerance and discrimination. Over years, various kinds of churches and places of worship have mushroomed, allowing for religious expression, but on the other end, there's been growing concern on some of the practices by new and charismatic churches, with some being classified as cults. Now, last year, a Kenyan church leader was arrested and charged with a new law under suicide pacts after about 400 people died from instructions to starve themselves in order to feel closer to God. But how much responsibility do we take for our religious choices? And where do we draw the line of voluntarily joining a church and being trapped in a cult? Now, we discuss these matters and more with social activist and fake pastors television host Secrecy, as well as journalist and author Pontsho Pilane. Good morning, ladies. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika.
Good morning.
Good
Thanks
morning.
for having us.
Good morning. Thank you for having us.
All right, Pontsho, let me start with you. I mean, you are the author of Power and Faith, how evangelical churches are quietly shaping our democracy.
Yes.
So I'll ask you that question. How are evangelical churches quietly shaping our democracy?
I mean, from our reproductive health rights to wanting to change laws and lobbying congregants and the public to bring regressive laws into into our parliament and into our country, we're seeing the trends that are happening where evangelical movements, not just even churches, but NGOs or organizations that are religious in nature but operate from an NGO's perspective, introducing laws or suggestions for our abortion laws to be regulated and changed and made more restrictive. We're seeing anti-decriminalization of sex work happen. We're seeing opposition to the hate speech bill, which seeks to protect LGBTQI plus community. So we're seeing all these things happen, and that's how they're quietly shaping by trying to really regress us to a time where gender issues and gender policies are more patriarchal, are more dehumanizing for certain marginalized people, but also to really take us back to a nostalgic time where religion really was the compass in which policy and laws were passed.
And we'll expand on the issue of patriarchy in just a moment. But coming to you, Sihle, as the host of a very, very popular show, Fake Pastors, could you just give us an example of one show that stood out for you in your previous season?
I think in the previous season, one episode that stood out for me was one where a young couple, they were married, they bought a house together, and they were going to church with their parents. Then they were introduced to these new fire churches. And the next thing you know, they started withdrawing from being with their family on a daily basis. The next thing you know, they sold their house, and then they moved into the church to go and stay in the church because they said they were working for the Lord. They resigned from work. Now, I'm talking of academics here. They resigned from work. One of them is a psychologist, one is a banker. They resigned from work, they sold their house, and all the proceeds from selling the house, the monies that they got from resigning from work, they gave it all to the pastor, and they staying in the church. Now, when we went to see this church, the church is in a tent, number one. Number two, they're no longer allowed to stay together as husband and wife.
Why?
Because biblically, according to the church, there's no marriage in heaven, so they stay separately.
There's no marriage in heaven?
Yeah. So they stay separately. So the women stay alone in this one shack, and the men stay alone in this one shack. So they had two cars, they gave one car to the pastor, and they're using one car. So the parents are the ones that wrote to us to say, please help us. We haven't seen our children in 4 years. And the children are just here in Pretoria, and the parents stay in Johannesburg South, but they can't see the kids because every time they go to the church, they're blocked from seeing the kids, and they do not even take their calls because they've been told by the pastor that their parents and their family are demonic. So if they continue to associate with them, the demons will never leave them. They'll just get more demons from the family. So that's one of the most diabolical episodes that I've seen.
Whew.
Yeah.
My goodness. All right. Pontsho, in your book, you know, you mention, one of the things that you mentioned that strikes you the most is the secretive nature of the church, and that there is a sinister way in which this secrecy manifests. What did you mean by this?
So there's a lot of, before even the secrecy that exists within a lot of charismatic churches, there's a lot of surveillance. So, and by that I mean that you have to account for all parts of your life.
True.
And it's put in a very, it's spiritualized, or it's certain verses are cherry-picked to make it sound theologically sound. So for an instance, you then have to account, if you're a couple, maybe like the couple that Sihle was talking about, you have to account your marriage or your relationship to your senior pastors or to an elder couple in the church. And what that really requires of people is to say everything that happens in their private relationship to a third party. And this is a way, again, of getting the surveillance, getting the information that is going to be used to control you. And then the secrecy comes with those who are what a lot of churches will call unequally yoked. So those who have not accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior are people that you shouldn't really surround yourself with. They're people that should not be in your close circle. And so you see the alienation then happen where the church community becomes the place where you socialize, where you do everything in your life, because it becomes so all-encompassing. And this is part of the playbook of how these churches operate. It is not by coincidence. It just happens to be conveniently or an ability to make it sound doctrinal in one way or the other. But we see this secrecy then manifest because people start alienating themselves from people who are not within the church, people, even if it's their family members, especially if the evangelizing to your family and your friends does not happen. So you surround yourself with the church. And the secrecy also comes in the form of when abuse takes place, right? Where certain pastors will be protected by the institution of the church, where victims are ostracized. And this again goes back to the patriarchal nature in which, you know, when you look at some of the research that I looked in for the book, that shows where, especially in charismatic evangelical churches, which is a very broad term, we see that authority and the hierarchy that exists from pastors to the congregants is almost seen as replacing of God itself, and that in respecting the hierarchy and the power of the pastor, you are submitting under God. So it's a lot of spiritual manipulation that takes place as well.
And you seem to be agreeing with absolutely everything.
I agree with
that Pontsho has
everything
said.
because I was one of the victims of the late TB Joshua.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm part of the BBC documentary. I'm on episode 2 and 3. So everything she's talking about is what I went through. You go through a process of being groomed. They groom you, and they use this divide and rule system where we might stay together, but we don't trust each other. So whatever happens to me, I can't tell her, and she can't tell me. And if it's found out that I've told her, TB Joshua used the system of meet disciple classes every night. Every single night there'd be a disciple class. So in a disciple class, you'd basically be shown. Somebody could pick up your hand and say, Daddy, Sister so-and-so today was drinking a glass of water, and you could be victimized for that, and everybody's going to hate you for that. So automatically you're being groomed to say, here, you don't say anything, you just keep your mouth, you just go along with everything. And when you talk about it, some of the things at that moment, the way they groom you, it's like psychologically where you end up believing that that which is happening to you is real, and it is supposed to happen that way, to a point where you can't do anything without reporting to the pastor. Whether you want to buy a car, whether you want to whatever you want to do, you have to report to the pastor, because if you don't do it, then you're seen as the rebel. You're seen as the one that doesn't want to submit under the authority. Remember, they will tell you that they hear directly from God. They are the voice of God, and God is saying this about you in their lives. And
so in essence, then you feel like you're betraying God.
Exactly, and most of the time, the big one, the big trump card they like using for young women or for women, they'll say if you're very disloyal because you've got spirit of lust, and they'll forever want to take you through deliverance. So that's when the abuse starts.
All right, let's pause it right there. I have so many questions, so we do have to take a break.
Okay.
All right, now I'm speaking to social activist and fake pastors television host Secrecy, as well as journalist and author of Power and Faith, How Evangelical Churches Are Quietly Shaping Our Democracy. Pontsho Pilane will be back. Stay with us. We continue the conversation now with social activist and fake pastors television host Secrecy, as well as journalist and author Pontsho Pilane. Pontsho, coming to you now. Okay, so now in the beginning of the book, right, you dedicated it to those who were brave enough to have left the church and those who will leave. What do you mean by this?
I believe that there's a reckoning that needs to happen within religious institutions, and I particularly write about evangelical churches because I think that there's a moment in which we're seeing charismatic churches rise. You know, research is showing us that many people are leaving mainline or traditional churches, but we're seeing the growth that's happening within Christianity is with prosperity, charismatic, Pentecostal, whatever the correct word is. I just umbrella term it and call them evangelical churches. And I'm saying there is also a movement of people who we call ourselves deconstructionists, who are deconstructing the harmful norms, values, and social norms that have been taught in these churches, and where people are leaving because of abuse. People are leaving because they're tired of being manipulated. People are leaving because in many of these churches you volunteer your time and your skills. 5 to 6 days a week you could spend working for the church for free, you know?
And now very briefly, what inspired you to write this book?
So for me, the book, I have a very academic background, and as a journalist, I'm also very interested in gender and sexual reproductive health. But I used to be a member of an evangelical church, and I preface that by saying that it was a white-led mega church that follows a lot of the international standards of operating, so planting lots of churches. And there was a lot of harm and religious trauma that really came from that. And combining my skills as a journalist and looking at the ways in which our policies and these churches influence our politics, our politicians, and the kind of social policies that we have, as well as using my personal story, I really tell the story about why we really need to be aware, more critical around not just our leaving, our people who choose to leave and deconstruct, but the people within churches as well, how they can be hold their leaders more accountable, and really ensure that there is no harm that is happening to the greater society because of their own beliefs. So, you know, you talk about freedom of religion, but there comes a responsibility with religion as well.
Now, Sihle, we've recently seen the recent acquittal of Pontsho. Firstly, what are your thoughts on that? And also, with your show that you do, Fake Pastors, how often do we see convictions when it comes to crimes in churches, basically?
Firstly, with the acquittal of Pontsho, I firstly want to say I am so sorry to his victims because they are now experiencing the worst kind of secondary victimization that one could ever experience. Because I feel our law, our government let us down. Because he was acquitted based on the NPA not being able to prove the victim's stories as true. And the funniest thing, well, not even funny, the painful thing is that just 3 weeks before he got his acquittal, the main whistleblower was gunned down. She lost her life. So if she had not lost her life, that man wasn't going to be a free man. And the most painful thing with our law is that in as much as we attended a press briefing with the CRL Commission, Pontsho has been taken back to Nigeria. He's out of the country. So even if they want to appeal it, even if they want to go through and find ways to want to resolve it within ourselves, look at Bushiri right now. How long have we been waiting for him, for his for him to be extradited back into South Africa? So this, for me, shows us that the law actually doesn't really work. And coming to that also, there's so many churches, the mega churches in South Africa, where their pastors will do atrocious things. They will get arrested, but they will get bail. And once they get the bail, they will then use the pulpit to curse and cause secondary victimization to the victims and their families through biblical verses, through this, through that. And that is why we say we want churches to be regulated. We're not saying follow the same thing you believe. If you believe in dogs, great for you. If you believe in cats, great for you. But just as much as if you're a medical doctor, if you're an educator, you are accountable to an institution. Teachers are accountable to SACE, you know? So let it be that churches are accountable to a body, because we asked the South African Council of Churches to say, why aren't you holding these people accountable? But then they say they've got a South African Council of Independent Churches. So anyone can just wake up and mushroom a church. So if a pastor is accused of something, why can't they say, right, we're taking your license, you can't preach until this is over? Because they use the pulpit to cause secondary victimization. Right. And the greatest line that they'll use is, God has done it for me. He has acquitted me. And you think to yourself, this is a whole lot of hogwash, and these people will believe it. I mean, look at the Pontsho case.
Well, technically in the Pontsho case also, they're now complainants because he has been acquitted.
Exactly.
Not victims.
Exactly. Now they're complainants.
Legally speaking.
And when you look at it, the sad part is that when he got acquitted, it was women who were outside the court dancing, clapping, praising the Lord that our Papa is free.
Can we talk about, let's talk about women in the church first and foremost, Pontsho, because you write quite extensively about this in your book, but also the psychological profile of a person or individuals who, as in the case that you have just described in the show, typically we would think that people who are duped by fake pastors are often poor, I say in inverted commas, or uneducated. But in this case, you're talking about academics.
Look, I'll give you a perfect example.
I'll let Pontsho first answer the question, and then we'll come back to you.
Yes, I mean, we already talked about patriarchy, right? Yeah. In the book, I also call the church, for legal reasons, I call the church I used to go to the family. And that is very strategic, and it's actually because the family structure is the first socialization that we have. It's where we learn patriarchy. It's where we learn hierarchy. It's where we learn that if you do not go by the social norms and standards of this grouping, that you will be ostracized, that you will be punished. And so churches operate in a very familial, some churches, especially evangelical churches, Sihle just said now, papa, you know, this idea of spiritual fathers and mothers creates a familial hierarchy within the church setting. And when you think about complementarianism and this idea of idealized gender roles, right? The men are born leaders, are God-given leaders, women submit. And on top of that, then we have the patriarchy that exists within society, where masculinities, especially harmful masculinities, are exalted over women and over society as a whole. And so what we see then is this compounding of so many socializations that then enable for men, especially, to get away with so many things, especially when they're in positions of power. But what we also see is that this indoctrination of patriarchy, of the church's hierarchy, is indoctrinated in women as well. And we know that women make up most of the people who attend churches. So women are, even though we are victims of patriarchy, we can be its enablers as well. And we see it a lot in churches.
In fact, I've seen that women can also be the biggest enablers of patriarchy. But in closing, because we do have to wrap the show, what advice do you have to people who could potentially be duped by fake pastors? Because we know there are many good churches out there.
Look, not every church or not every man of God is fake. Remember, behind the title is a human being. And the advice I'd have is, I'll give an example when you talk about academics. My own biological mother, she's an academic, but she still belongs under that church. As a result, she wants nothing to do with me and my kids. And has a protection order against me and my kids.
Your mother?
Yes, biological. Until I repent and publicly say, no, I was lying, this never happened to me, she wants nothing to do with me. So just to show you that it's not just in a storybook form. For me, it's a life thing. It's a reality that I'm living. So for my sanity, my psychologist said you need to accept an apology that you may never receive so that you can live, and your children deserve a better version of you. But for people who are still in these churches, I just pray that one day that veil will just fall off and they'll be able to realize that they're losing so much time. Because trust me, once you walk out of the church, you realize, oh my God, the world has changed. Because all the time in church, you're like, oh, now the world has changed. You realize the time wasted, the time you've wasted within the system of the church, and time that can never be reversible. And those who have left, I would urge you, get counseling, go see your local doctors, go to the local clinics, get psychological intervention, because trust me, you might leave in body form, but for the mind to actually leave, it takes forever. I mean, when I talk about it at the BBC documentary, I say I had physically left the church, but when the building collapsed in Nigeria, when TB Joshua phoned me, I still was there to assist, to go and give bags of money to families who lost their family members. And yet I had said, I'm gone, I'm gone, I'm gone. But psychologically, they've groomed you to a point where you fear these people to say, if I do not do A, B, C, D, then something atrocious will happen. So it's just a matter of education. If our government can put down resources to make sure that education on gender-based violence and femicide holistically, especially within the religious sector, is being amplified. But the problem we notice is that our government will not really amplify it because they rely on these mega churches for votes. Remember, when it's voting time, they hop church to church, church to church. So, and most of the time, they will not go to that small church at the corner of Garankuwa. They will go to the mega churches. And you find that that's where most of the gruesome atrocities
Speaking of which,
happen.
what are your thoughts on Pontsho Pilane visiting Bushiri's church?
It's disappointing, but what is even more disappointing is that the deputy president of our country is currently at an Easter Sunday service at Kwasiza Bantu Mission, a church that has documented allegations of abuse, of racism, of cult-like behavior. And so to Sihle's point as well, around the fact that churches play such a big social, but also political, have so much political power within society, within our politics, just shows how they can quietly shape our democracies.
Exactly.
And so when we look at our leaders, you know, go to these churches and co-sign, they are whitewashing the atrocities that have happened, but they're also then weaponizing the power or taking advantage of the power that's in that church for votes, for favor, or for whatever political reasons and ambitions they have.
Ladies, we're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you both for your time.
Thank you
so much.
All right, that was social activist and Fake Pastors television host Sihle Sibisi, as well as journalist and author of Power and Faith, How Evangelical Churches Are Quietly Shaping Our Democracy.